Welcome to today's episode, and I am honestly so honoured to have the fabulous Jo Twiselton on today's show. I'm also calling it show recently instead of podcast. Maybe there's an inner American in me coming out. Whatever it is, I love it. I've got the fabulous Jo on today, and actually we are preparing for a fantastic conversation because Jo is somebody who is about to celebrate 20 years in her consulting business, which is just phenomenal. And it's actually been a phenomenal privilege to have somebody who has been in business when we all know the success and failure rates by the kind of 5-year point for entrepreneurs, who's been in business for a sustained period of time to then come in and be like, do you know what? I'm going to join the C-suite. Let's see what we can do differently. So it's an absolute honour and a privilege, to be able to work with Jo, but also to bring her onto the podcast to talk to you today. And we have a really interesting conversation coming up for you. And actually, there was a really key quote for me that Jo gives right towards the end of today's episode. And it is, the work that I do for my business is just as important as the work I do for my clients. And I just want you to hear that now and hear it as the preface to the epic conversation that we had, because I think it's so important, incredibly valuable. And this was a really, really exciting, honest, transparent conversation that I think will really benefit you wherever you are in your business today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. I am so excited to have you here, Jo. Thank you so much for giving up your time today and coming on to share your journey with everybody.
Thanks, Jess. I'm really excited about being here. So
for those of you who are not privy to pre-podcast chats, I've just terrified Jo by telling her about the sparrowhawks that have decided they are landing in my garden. I have accidentally opened up a bird takeaway. We probably won't cover too much more about that today, but just in case it comes up, that's where we're at. But Jo, in the meantime, could you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
yes, so I run a business called Twist Consultants. And this year I've been running Twist Consultants for 20 years. So yeah, exactly. Wow, it made me feel very old. So it's quite cool actually, and it's gone by in a flash. I'll come on to that in a little while, but what I do is help organizations and the leaders in them to support positive organizational cultures when things are really changing, so that people communicate better together, they collaborate better, so you get less disruption than you sometimes get when you go through large scale organizational change, and it helps them achieve their transformation basically.
I love that, because I think we've all worked in organizations, I know I have, where they would open change projects and be like, everyone will just get on board. And everyone was, fun fact, not on board. I think probably the biggest one I went through was with a recruitment company I worked for, and they decided to move us from BlackBerries to iPhones. That's how old I am. But we had this huge project, and the biggest problem that people had was not being involved. I was friends with people in the IT team. So as soon as I got wind that we might be getting snazzy iPhones, I was like, can I have one? Can I be one of the testers? And of course they were like, yeah, sure, because we were friends. But people senior to me had not heard anything about this and were quite upset that rock up with like an iPhone 2 or whatever it was. And they're like, how have you got this? And, so change programs don't always go to plan. And it is always about that team dynamic and the way that it's handled and the culture within. And sometimes that's really expensive. for organizations, as a problem that they need to
Yeah.
resolve on the fly, as opposed to teaching people how to deal with it beforehand.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Jess, because there's several aspects to that. And what we're seeing today is I'm having a lot more conversations with leaders and teams about how can we help people flex and be more adaptable. Because it used to be big old change programs, let's do this, but now it's like micro shifts. So we need people to be able to do that without feeling that their world's falling around their ears and that they have some agency in it, like you just said. It's shifted a little.
Yeah, and it must be really difficult because post-pandemic, which I know that nobody wants to think about, but post-pandemic, when COVID hit, the whole world was falling apart. So actually change must be quite traumatic
Yeah.
for organizations now. It's like, oh gosh, this pushes us back to this time that was
Yeah.
incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Makes your job even more integral because it is ultimately a very difficult time financially and in terms of onboarding people, but also in terms of this relived trauma that people seem to attach now to change.
Yeah. Constantly talking about post-COVID or post-pandemic. It's a constant conversation. And it's also the same for leaders because we tend to forget that they are human beings too.
Yeah.
So some of the work I do is how am I going to get in the right position to be able to lead my team through this, especially when I might not necessarily agree with what we're doing.
Oh,
So that's always an interesting one.
I love it. I think people also end up having sales conversations where they have to manage the expectations of leaders and organizations around, yeah, you could do that, but it might not be a great idea. And here's perhaps what you should consider instead, which segues us perfectly into the way that you've been selling, because you joined C-suite not long ago, actually. What are we talking, 8 months, 9 months ago?
So weirdly, I was checking this out before we spoke. So I came to a Converting Corporates event in 2022.
Yes.
And I signed up, I think, in 23. And then I didn't do anything. I danced about with it.
Oh my God, I love this so much. Like, I had it and didn't use it.
Didn't use it. And
people expected the episode to go.
and then we did the sprint in April, and that got me fired up.
Oh, I love it.
So that's what changed.
Oh, so we did our own little mini change program. I didn't even know about it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Wow.
And I drew on all my experience.
Do you know what though? I love that because I think it's really honest. And I think so many people, when they consider joining anything, I know that I've done exactly the same. I've joined programs where I've had every good intention of doing something. And then I've been like, life, or, just couldn't be bothered or whatever. I think it's a really brave move to go back to something because it takes hard work and commitment and that renewed motivation. That's really difficult. You came back for the sprint, obviously, because April, yay, financial year end, financial beginning. And now what I'm hearing is rejuvenated Jo.
Yep.
Super on board. You've absolutely smashed the last, we're in August now, so the last 4 months. That's exciting.
It is, and it feels very different. What was interesting was back in 22, when I came to the Converting Corporates event, you talked to us about changing market being on the horizon post-COVID.
Yeah.
And I saw that playing out the end of 23 and early 24 for me. And it went really quiet. So it's the quietest I've known it for the whole time that I've been doing this. I was like, oh. And then I thought, actually, I've got a toolkit and I'm not using it properly. So when the sprint came round, it was like, actually, I'm not that busy with client work. I'm going to focus it so that this is my client work because I'm doing it for my business.
I love that.
So that's the shift.
That's a really good mentality because I think we all get focused on the busy work and being like, oh, I'm just going to over deliver for this client and hope that something else turns up, rather than being like, I'm going to look at my controllable factors and apply. So what are some of the things that look different now? You mentioned the changing market. So did it magically reappear, or?
I think it was there all the time.
We rediscovered.
Which I totally discovered. I wasn't having enough conversations. So that was the pinnacle of my realization. And when you don't do that, I kind of thrive on having conversation. I work as part of my work is as a coach and a facilitator. So I get a lot of energy from other people at points, and then I have to go and sit in a quiet room for a while. But
Introverts, you might.
yes. But what I was finding was I'm not having enough conversations and I'm not getting that feedback, and I'm not able to help when I know I could. So that was where I was coming from. It's like, how do I get back into having more conversations and different conversations? I've got a whole load of previous clients who I still work with, but it was, how do I re-energize almost those conversations and also find different people to work with?
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's a vicious cycle moment that happens for every single salesperson ever, which is when you're in a slump or a plateau or just a quiet period. It's easy to keep telling yourself the story, nothing's moving. Oh, the market's just not moving right now. Oh, nobody's doing anything right now. Oh, and you almost get into this, it's not like a laissez-faire attitude, because you need to do the things, but you almost convince yourself that there's no point, because doing the things is pointless because nothing's happening. Why bother? Like, it takes a lot to get out of that and to start thinking, actually, no, I could be building my pipeline. I think the interesting thing about what you've done is most people, when they're in a plateau, go and choose another industry entirely. They'll fall into that, nothing works in my industry, I'm going to go and target something else, or nothing works for my coaching office, I'm going to go and do something else. You haven't done that. You've gone, okay, cool, maybe this is a little bit about activity. Let's go and give it another bash.
Yeah. And I think you're right, because it would be quite easy to go and then seeking out that confirmation with other people that it's a bit rubbish.
Yes.
It's like, find those people that keep telling me the same thing that I want to believe, rather than seeking out the people that I've now got in the C-suite who are like, we can do this. So it's very different mindset.
I think that's really interesting, because there was a Stephen Bartlett episode of the Diary of a CEO, and people have very mixed feelings about the Stephen Bartlett podcast. Personally, couldn't care less. Like, I think his interviews are interesting, but some of them are with people I'm not interested in. And that's my only opinion on it. But a few months ago, he interviewed Daniel Priestley, who I actually really like. He's one of the few entrepreneurs that I still like. And in that interview, he talked about surrounding yourself with people who are doing the things you want to do. And it's exactly what you've just pointed out there. It's really easy to find lots of people who are not successful. Like, you can go on Facebook every single day and there are people screaming into the void that business is hard, everything's changed, nothing is working. And you'll get people every day who'll talk to you about, well, you need advanced marketing strategies, or you need advanced sales strategies, because it's a really good way for them to sell. Yeah. Sadly, the reality is, over many years in sales, I can tell you it's not that complex. I wish it was. But it's really hard to find other people who are doing well. And it's also hard to find people who will challenge your perception around doing well. And it's hard to find people who know how to give you advice to do well, because so many people are just there to parrot what they might have learned very recently about marketing or something, rather than people who've done the reps. And I think that's one of the great things about the C-suite community, is you've got a lot of people who are putting in the reps every single day.
Yeah.
So if they say, oh yeah, well, actually this industry has just been hit really hard with X and Y, they've got the ability to talk about that and it's qualified. What you very rarely hear in there is nothing works.
Yeah. Back to your point about activity and nothing working, I'm waving my fingers around for virtual inverted commas of nothing working. Is actually, I've picked this strategy. If that strategy doesn't work, I'm not fundamentally changing what I do, but I'm changing the way that I approach it. Yes. If me going to find networking events and speaking, which is what I was doing, wasn't working, then I would take another approach. But again, we have that community in the C-suite where people will share what they're doing so you can learn from them. So it's like, I'm not going to make that mistake because someone else has shared their experience. So, and likewise, you can share yours.
I think it's really valuable. I also think it's valuable to play to your strengths.
Mm,
That's one of the things that you've massively looked at in the last few months, because so many people can get tied up in what works for one person. I talk about this a lot. I say all the time, cold email marketing is one of my favorite things because I can be removed from it and it's high volume and it's simple. It doesn't mean that everybody likes it. And if you don't like something, it doesn't mean that you'll do particularly well at it. Some people are built to go to networking events and are really good at creating those relationships, and they thrive off of the energy they get from the room. So they should be using strategies around that to do better. And I think that's one of the great things that we see inside the C-suite is that you have those strategies, you can apply them, you can use whichever, but there's a lot of autonomy around what you choose to do and how you choose to spend your time. It's not, we're not prescribing you should do it one way.
No, and that was so for example, when I've been doing speaking gigs with clients, I found it really valuable because it means I can go into part of the portal that is around speaking.
Yeah.
And I go in, I don't have to go through the prescribed process of you need to go through here and all these different phases, just dip in and out as to whatever's appropriate. That's what I found really valuable. It's like for me, that's been really helpful.
And so how have you found it since April? Because I think lots of people come out and they go, oh, well, it's April. And if I haven't done well in April, then I'm probably not going to do well the whole summer. So they kind of throw their hands up and they tell themselves summer isn't busy. That hasn't necessarily been the case for you, because whenever I talk to you, you're like, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And summer's not been relaxing for Jo thus far.
Yeah, so this is a learning journey. Even at my point in life, I am still learning a huge amount of how to manage my clients. Because it's a little bit quieter at the moment because quite a few people have gone on holiday. So that's positive. Since April, it's been quite busy. And I think the difference is, and I think you say this quite a lot, once you start having conversations, it continues. And that's what's happening. And there's elements, again, all the things I do with my coaching work around transition and how you move through change is like different habits, sticking to different habits and making them become the norm. So consistency in following up, consistency in showing up repeatedly. It's not rocket science, but sometimes the emotional aspect of it can get in the way. So it's taking that away. And that's so since April, I've found it consistent, not too busy, which is good. So I've managed to keep a lid on that. But that's good. But I think it's really lovely to be doing work, which is work I like to do, that I know that people need and that makes a bit of a difference in the world, or I feel it does, and that I get paid for. So that whole like ikigai concept of it all slotting together. So that's where I'm kind of working towards now.
I love that. And it is a case of, what you do now impacts you in 90 days.
Yeah.
And I say that all the time, and I say it on the internet, and people are like, yeah, but you don't understand, Jess, like, because this is why you're wrong. And I get that. People think I'm wrong about a lot of things, and I am wrong about a lot of things, not sales related things, but, cooking, other stuff. The reality is, though, I can pinpoint every single quiet period in my business because 3 months earlier, I was dossing about. And it's not a case of, clear, like you can be sick. We were talking about this earlier, both of us have had COVID this year. Thank you very much. But the actions that you take to prepare your business for the times that you, in an emergency, when you're off sick, when you have family things that you need to deal with, that's very different to consistently not showing up or to consistently doing the wrong things, expecting different results. And I think, you're having a busy summer because in April, you started having more conversations, and the more conversations you have, and the time it takes to sign things off and deliver and all that kind of thing. And then you'll have more conversations in September, and in December we'll be having the same conversation about, oh, things are busy and I'm still getting to do this work that I love. And I think that's really powerful. It's about creating the new habit rather than just showing up, making some money, and then thinking, oh, deliver now. My revenue's dropped off the cliff edge and I have to build it all again.
And I think I've learned this, that I used to do quite a lot of big projects and they would come to an end. You're pooped by the time you finish that.
Yeah.
So you need a few weeks off, and then you're like, oh, I need a new project. So you're constantly in a massive feast or famine, and then making a conscious decision that I wanted that to look different. There's a lot of intention, I think, and thinking about what that intention looks like, whether it's conscious or not.
Yeah.
I didn't want that to be the situation for me. It works for other people, but not for me. So it's having that blend, but being able to plan. And if you think about, and you talk to us about this all the time, if you think about how corporate operates, September, they are planning for next year.
Yeah.
And then they may be now, I'm having conversations about 25 work. So it's how we shift that thinking into a different mindset, but just keep doing the work to build the habit.
I think that raises a lot of interesting points to people, because there'll be some people listening to this and be like, but Jo, why wouldn't you want to do big projects? And it's like, not every business is built the same. Some people want to work on big projects, they love it, they get really involved, and that's all great. There are also, I think, a lot of people who don't actually really know what they want from corporate work until they do it. And that's really interesting, because we're in this kind of weird digital age where everyone thinks you should build the same business because that's what's going to be successful. And it's like, well, we all measure success very differently. It also brings up a lot of things around scope and pricing that most entrepreneurs don't consider. I've definitely made this mistake when I first started my business and I was doing consulting for corporates, because I'd come from a world where I was an employee. Unusually, I'd come from a world where I'd employed other people in recruitment, and I'd seen some of the temporary contractor rates and things. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I guess this is how it works. But you always undercharge at the beginning, and you're always desperate to over deliver. So what ends up happening is that these big projects don't just become big projects, they become even bigger projects. It's like the Ben-Hur of the project world. And you end up going way above scope, and you end up not having charged enough, and you end up working on those things that do just burn you out inevitably. So when you get to the end of it, of course you think, oh God, no, I'd never touch something like that again. Like, why would you want to? I was saying to my CFO, I was like, oh, if I just did speaking gigs, I was like, I could just do like 25 speaking gigs a year. And he was like, oh, and I was like, yeah, and like speaking gigs take me a couple of hours to prepare for. I was like, maybe I'd just do that. Like, it was a revelation. And he was like, yeah, sure, whatever keeps you making money, like knock yourself out. And that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to build the business that works for you.
Yeah, that's it. And as you say, other people might love doing massive projects, being part of somebody's organization for a little while and then coming out. But things shift as we move through. And as you say, you learn as you go. So you suddenly think, actually, I don't want to do this anymore, but I would love to do that. And that's why it's such a great, I love working in this space, because I've never done B2C. So I'm slightly different in that sense, I think.
Lucky. I had to write a sales page or deal with a funnel. Like, most of us are still traumatized from these experiences. I think it's so interesting though. Like, businesses do shift, and they shift based on priority. And you've run your consultancies now for 20 years. Like, that's huge in terms of not only the business growth and things that you've experienced, but also in terms of life experiences that happen. Over the course of 20 years, people move houses, they change partners, they get married, they have kids, they do whatever they're going to do. Those things all can take a toll on the business that we want to build, or change the idea of the business that we want to build. I'm personally child-free by choice, and I'm quite happy with a dog. which means that I technically have a lot of time if I wanted to get involved in big projects and things with corporates, and sometimes I do. Would I want to do it forever? No, it's pretty stressful. Like it's a lot of responsibility to take on a big project and to resource that project. Sometimes there are projects that I say no to because they're not in my best interest or the companies that I'm working with best interests. At this moment in time, would I just like to do a bunch more speaking gigs, get wheeled out on stage every so often? Yeah, easy. Ask me next year, will I want to do it? Probably not. I'll have done 10 or so by then and I'll be bored. Like, I think it's important that we always acknowledge, like, what is in your business now in 12 months might not be, in 5 years
Absolutely.
won't be.
Yeah. And I do smaller projects now, but they're nowhere near as, time critical or stressful for me to deliver as they used to be. So they're much smaller. They're with different shaped organizations. So it's bringing in that sort of multinational corporate perspective into a smaller space.
Yeah.
But it feels very different. And I think that's it's understanding a little bit and making sure that you recognize what really works for you and what really floats your boat at certain points in your life. And as you say, with whatever else is going on around you.
Yeah. I mean, we've done 2 house moves in the last 3 years. So I think quick and easy is my
Yeah.
phrase of choice for 2024, the remainder. But it's that kind of thing. And I think it's important that people talk about it, because so often we do get caught into this. There's only one way to build a consultancy. There's only one way to build a coaching business. There's only one way to be a facilitator. There really isn't, and your sales process is not determined by the offers that you dream up in the shower. Like, your sales process is going to be determined by those all important conversations that you're having. What would you say have been the biggest changes over the 20 years in consultancy? Because to do 20 years in consultancy and then join the C-suite, people might think, but hang on, like, you had a really successful business already. What was the point? Like,
I never really sit still. I'm always trying to do something different. So that's one thing. It is quite different. I mean, the internet, everyone says this, but the internet has just like stratospherically shifted everything.
yeah.
So business models look very different. Organizations look very different in the way that they recruit, they retain, they change. It's quite a shift. But the fundamental thing that hasn't changed for me and my clients is that people are at the core of it. And that's where I come from with the work that I do, is like, how do we make this work for people so that they can do a better job for you? That's fundamentally where I come from. And that hasn't shifted, but there is so much else around that has. There's probably a massive list that I could come up with, but I think the agility piece is really important as well.
Yeah.
Organizations just don't sit still. They can't, or else they won't survive.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we see a lot now about the way that organizations, some of them have sat still and how that changed. I think the big example people always use is like Blockbuster and Netflix. And, everyone uses that. And I look at it now and I think, but that was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
If we looked at more recent examples, I was reading up, because obviously I'm a big nerd, about the Casper mattress brand recently.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So this is a fun one, right? So mattress brand were the first mattress brand to do mattresses in a box. They brought this to the market and they were like, we've got this mattress in a box and it's great and delivered to your house. And they actually raised tons of money. They raised tons and tons of funding based on this USP of mattress in a box. However, like a year or so later, they got a really bad review from a sleep review site that said Casper mattresses weren't great. So Casper retaliated by buying this site. And now they only post positive reviews about Casper mattresses. And I'm sure that is completely relevant. And I'm sure that all of the reviewers absolutely think that the Casper brand is the best. And it's nothing to do with the fact that it's bought by them. But essentially what happened was that loads of other companies then went, well, we can make a mattress in a box. And their USP was gone. And so over time, what actually happened was that they realized that Casper was pretty much dead in the water, because now you've got loads of other companies that do mattresses in a box or home delivered or whatever. And so all the money that they raised has gone into really sustaining a brand where apparently they're making like a $300 loss on every single mattress they sell.
Ouch.
Yeah, which is painful, but we still use the blockbuster Netflix example, even though that was a lot further away in time. Unfortunately, you know, when we look at how the internet has arrived and accessibility and things, we're looking for these examples that are much, much further away now than actually the things that are happening around us. And that change is always happening.
Definitely. Definitely. It's fascinating, actually, how quickly everything shifts, and it's out there really quickly. There's the accessibility to data and information for people to make judgments on organizations. Glassdoor didn't exist when I started.
No, thank goodness in some cases.
Yeah. And you couldn't write a review.
Yeah.
So
you just told all your friends. And
yeah.
I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? The rise of the internet has been very difficult for companies because it's very hard to keep a lid on. You know, in the last year, we've had the Brewdog scandal. We've had lots of companies have employees come out and say, actually, it's not as much fun working for this company as you might think. And those have caused really public levels of consternation and change, you know, as a result, which is good. Change is a good thing. But it also puts an awful lot of public pressure on all of the time. And even when companies do something right, they're told that they're doing it wrong. And I think that's the interesting thing about the area that you work in, is that even when a company is making progress, it's not enough, or it's not quick enough, or it's not good enough. And, you know, I used the example of Greg's recently on LinkedIn. It's probably the only LinkedIn post I've had that will ever be popular remotely. I talked about the fact that Greg's have decided to give employees, frontline employees, I think it's £700 per employee. So they're like, we're in a cost of living crisis, have £700, you know, we'll eat into our profits, no worries. And I posted it on LinkedIn, and the amount of people who messaged me were like, well, that's disgusting because Greg's have way more money than that and they should be giving all their money to all their, and I was just like, I understand the frustration. But I also talk to a lot of people who tell me companies only do things as a tick box exercise.
Yep.
And so here's an instance where a company they don't have to do it. There's no obligation, there's no legal obligation. Morally, obviously, it's a good thing to do and ethically, but nobody's forcing them to do that. They've just done it, and it's not enough. You know, and I'm not hiring the amount of people that Greg's are.
No.
If I did hire the amount of people that Greg's did, that's a lot of £700 to give away. I think that it's going to be interesting for the change industry as a whole to look at, well, how do we balance public perception with the projects that we're running and the pressure that the leaders within feel about how things are being executed in the public eye always.
Yeah. Because we've got more windows into organizations than we ever had before, because everyone knows, and even if it's not necessarily true, it's still out there.
Oh yeah, and it lives forever.
Exactly. Exactly. But that reputational element is, you know, it's a lens that we look at, or I look at all the time, even though I'm predominantly working with internal teams and leaders. Whatever goes on inside tends to show up outside. So it's a really important point that you can't lose sight of.
And it creates fear. And I think, you know, actually, if we all reflected that into our own organizations, whether you're a solopreneur or somebody who's, you know, running your business with a bit of a team behind you, a lot of the decision making or lack of decision making comes from this place of fear of how will other people see it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that that's quite an interesting thing to reflect on in your own businesses. Well, actually, if I wasn't worried about whether or not other people would think I looked desperate by asking for the sale regularly, would I ask for the sale more often? Or if I wasn't worried that other people might think that my business wasn't as successful as it possibly could be, would I be going out and sending more emails, or would I be putting myself out there to have more conversations or going to more events?
Yeah, and you give less of a toot. I don't want to swear, but you do give less of a toot, actually. The more that you do, the less that you worry. You do get a bit more resilient about it all. And that's some of the work I do with individuals as well, and organizational teams, is like, how do we build this so that we don't take it personally?
Yeah.
And we can keep moving forward.
You've got to make the muscle.
Yeah, that's it. And a lot of this, all of this conversation is about muscle building, to be honest.
I love
for
that.
me.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's what people should take away about the C-suite is it's just a muscle builder. You're building your sales
Yeah.
and resilience muscles. I'm gonna go and get a gym.
There you go, Jess. That's your other business.
Yeah, it's a gym, but just full of computers and
Yeah.
phones. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it. And I say to everybody, I ask everybody at the end of an episode where you've come on and shared your journey and breakthroughs, what you would say to somebody who was on the fence about joining the C-suite, because it's not for everybody, you know,
No.
and I think that's the very clear thing that I would say. It's not for everybody. It's not always the right time for everybody. But if there was somebody who was sat listening to this episode thinking, you know, maybe my business needs a bit of change, maybe I should consider the C-suite, what would be your piece of advice for them?
It's an investment in your own business. And as I said earlier, I've taken a perspective that the work that I do for my business is as important as the work that I do for clients, because I can't do that if I don't have a business. So it's an investment, but not only financial, but time. And it's probably, I think, if you struggle with working on your own quite a lot, which we do, it's a great space to ask questions that you don't think, is this a stupid question? I never think this is a stupid question, because somebody will have had exactly, or many people have had exactly the same space. So it's just, I feel it's structure that I didn't necessarily have. And wherever you are in your business and you want to make a change, that probably means that you need a different mindset and a different working structure, which is what I've had with the C-suite that I wasn't really thinking about when I signed up. I was like, I just need to do something different. And that's what I did. So, but the mindset shift and the structure piece, they kind of go hand in hand.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on. I really
Pleasure. And thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
I know. I'm like, I could talk to you all day. I think the thing from this is that lots of people be thinking, oh, wow, actually, that's really interesting. I've not considered that before. Where can people find you? Because I say to everybody, you know, people who come on the podcast are sharing their journey for the benefit of all of you. And so if you know companies or are working with companies that could use someone like Jo to come in and say, actually, why don't we think about this? Why don't we think about change a little bit differently and have a little bit of a different conversation about it? Where's the best place for them to reach out and introduce you?
So there's two spaces. The main one is my website, which is twistconsultants.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
I love it. And I like being connected to your LinkedIn. You do like a little weekly wins thing.
I do. My 3 things that I've been doing for about 5 years now.
I really love it. Every time I see it, it reminds me of the good news show on that you see
on Instagram.
Someone's good news, Russell Howard's. And I love it. Or like the good deed feed in the metro. And
Yeah. It's like 3 things I've taken away from this week.
If I'm not featured this week, I'm going to be terribly disappointed.
Noted.
It's up to your expectations. But thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your time. And as I say to everybody, you know, if you have enjoyed this episode or you've had a breakthrough moment listening to Jo and her journey, please do reach out and let her know and say thanks, because it takes time out of people's day to come in and share their experience, their breakthroughs, their journey with you. And it does make a big difference when somebody reaches out on LinkedIn and says, hey, you made me think about something in a different way. And I appreciate that. So if you have had that experience today, do reach out to Jo on LinkedIn, on her website, and feel free to introduce her to any companies that you might know that need her.